people, not just feeding low-income people waste or surplus food, but making sure that they have the same access to healthy food that other people have. And these things require collaboration across many different efforts at different scales. There are a wealth of existing models of changing business, production systems, and consumption patterns that show promise, but they need to be strengthened through research and through policy incentives. In particular, we're seeing a lot of innovation at the local level that needs to be lifted up to the national and international scales. This is another way of looking at the changes that need to be made. This is a diagram from Kate Rayworth, who used to work with Oxfam GB, and she took that diagram of the planetary boundaries on the outside and imposed human rights on the inside. And she said that our inclusive and sustainable economic development that will create a safe and just space for humanity lies between these thresholds, which we can't pass on the environmental side, and the thresholds which we can't pass for reasons of morality and justice that have to do with human rights, which everyone needs to have access to. So, as we look at some of these promising solutions, we'll start with some of the local solutions. You've already seen a lot of examples, but just to summarize, some of the reasons why city policy and programs are so attractive are, first, that we have examples everywhere. Many different places where we can find those examples and take them and apply them to our own areas. Second, the speed of possible implementation of these local initiatives is in keeping with the urgency of the changes that we need to make. City government tends to be a lot more flexible and more nimble and responsive to citizens than national governments. I've pretty much given up on trying to interact with my national government, and we're in an extreme situation in the United States, but I guarantee that at the city level, the people will actually talk with you. They care about you. So they will help you to have voice so that you can contribute to making solutions, and you will be able to see the impacts of the solutions that you help to implement more readily, and you'll be willing to support those local solutions. So I'm all in favor of starting local and then building up. Let me give you just a few quick examples of places where you can find solutions. First, I really like FAO's Food for the Cities program. The URL is right here on the side. They have a listserv. You can ask them questions. They are working in pilot cities all around the world, and they show you what they're doing in each of those pilot cities. And then, of course, you know all about the Milan Urban Food Policy Pact. This is a Feltrinelli publication, as I'm sure you know. And here's an example of a report that EPAS Food put out about what makes urban food policy happen that might be useful to some of you. We tried to pull together some case studies of really good urban food policy and look at why it happened in those places and why it didn't happen in other places. So a few examples, a few specific examples to add on to what you've already seen. I'm building up from very small examples that are quite focused to holistic examples. First, Toronto, the city of Toronto in Canada, has just started a pollinator strategy. You've probably heard about the insect apocalypse, that insects are disappearing worldwide. Very serious. Pollinators are particularly important to us because something like a third of every bite that we eat has come to us at the courtesy of pollinators. or because pollinators have made that bite possible. So Toronto is taking many steps to try to encourage pollinators within city limits. Things like planting wildlife gardens, encouraging people not to use harmful pesticides, things like neonicotinoids that are especially pernicious to bees. I noticed as I was walking around the neighborhood, there's a tiny little wildflower garden just down the road right in front of the Ely. So Milan is obviously trying to implement some of these too. Second example is Seoul, Korea, South Korea, their waste management strategy in which they started charging people for food waste. So everyone has to measure the food waste that they discard, and it's added onto your account, and you get a bill for discarding food waste. They are burning a lot of that food waste and creating bioenergy, methane, from the food waste that they burn. And one of the results of their changes in dealing with food waste is that their rate of recycling has gone way up, and the amount of food waste that goes into landfills, where much of it is turned into methane, an especially terrible greenhouse gas, the methane has gone way down as the food waste has also decreased. And then a final example of a really holistic strategy is Belo Horizonte in Brazil, which was a pilot city for many of the right to food strategies that have been implemented in other places. These are some of the things that Belo Horizonte implemented. They created a market space in the middle of the city, a farmer's market, where low-income farmers, poor farmers, would have priority. And they have tables where people can buy a cheap, healthy meal. Anybody can buy that. So in this picture, we have students sitting side by side with lawyers and professionals and teachers. Everybody comes to this space and eats together. It's an important way to share ideas as well as getting cheap, healthy food. They've created vegetable gardens and orchards. They have put a lot of their program budget into purchasing food for school meal programs and for subsidized stores that are selling staples. They're paying low-income farmers to produce that food. And with these changes, they've almost eliminated hunger. But it only took about 2% of the city's full budget. This is not an expensive proposition. Taking these good ideas from other places can lead to huge results for people who are poor and hungry with very little money spent. And they've had a 75% reduction in child malnourishment. So let's move on to what we need to do next. As I said, I'll be emphasizing 3 different points. The first that I want to talk about is understanding and incorporating the true cost of food in business decisions. This true cost accounting is a method that's being applied more widely in food systems today. It's an economic model that identifies and quantifies the total cost of food and agricultural production, depending on the type of farming system. So the sorts of issues that I was showing you at the beginning of my presentations, those are costed out and added to the price of food. The goal is to improve the transparency of the true cost of producing food, to increase fairness to farmers and decrease the environmental and public health impacts. When making food choices, eaters usually don't see those costs. They don't see the costs of pollution, water scarcity, soil degradation, increasing greenhouse gas emissions, poor labor standards, the health effects of non-nutritious foods. All of this is invisible to the eater who's in the store buying food. They're just looking for the cheapest food, most often, or the food that looks the best. Valuing these externalities in economic terms is useful not just for consumers, but also for policymakers and business stakeholders, so that they can reach decisions that consider these full costs and benefits to the ecosystem. Managing the externalities that are involved with food production and food consumption, it's not something magical. Simply knowing what the true cost of food is not going to get you immediately to eliminating those externalities. You still need to adjust prices, but knowing what those true costs are allows business to manage risk much better than they're able to manage risk now. So here are a couple of other sources for learning about the true cost of food. FAO has a methodology that they've developed that they call MARCH. I put a couple of sources down here. TEEB Agri-Food is all about assigning a cost to food. And the Global Alliance for the Future of Food has a lot of resources on their website that will help you learn about the true cost of food and what's known now about implementing this method. So key roles for business here are to incorporate the true costs of food into considerations of risk and cost, to develop and implement solid metrics. Lots of times we don't have the metrics for the important things that we need to be measuring, to test innovation by rigorous criteria of whether it will really contribute to sustainable food systems. Who will benefit from that innovation? How will they benefit? At what cost? So not just innovating for the sake of innovation or because the entrepreneur can make money from it, but because it truly contributes to the sustainability of food systems. And then finally, looking for complementary roles of social and market-based innovation. My second major step that I want to emphasize is analyzing and promoting agroecology as the antidote to industrial food. This is what Hunter Lovins was calling regenerative agriculture. Organic agriculture is an example of agroecology, but there are many other examples. Agroforestry is an example that's particularly relevant in some dryland areas because it can pull water up from very deep below the soil. We have done 2 reports on agroecology through EPES Food that you can find on our website. We did a report talking about this paradigm shift, and then we did a second report looking at case studies of how different farms or communities have made the shift to agroecology and what we can learn from those case studies. For those of you who are a little unsure about what agroecology is, it's still not a common term in many places. It's considered to be a science, a set of practices, and also a social movement. This chart is showing 10 principles of agroecology that were developed by the Food and Agriculture Organization in meetings that they held around the world. And these are frequently held up as some of the hallmarks of agroecology. Things like aiming to enhance the power of local markets and building on social and solidarity economic vision, encouraging stronger participation of producers and consumers in decision-making, encouraging diversity among people, encouraging women and youth. So you can find these easily as the FAO 10 Principles of Agroecology if you want to look at them and see how FAO has described all of them. But one of the barriers to implementing agroecology is that so little of the global research budgets have been put into analyzing agroecology. A recent report in the United States said that only a little over 1% of our Department of Agriculture research budget went into agroecology. The rest of it was going basically into industrial food systems because that's what's been supported in my country and then exported to many other places around the world. It's been supported partly because of that close cooperation. I could say collusion, which is a especially prevalent word in the United States nowadays, but the collusion between industry and government in the United States. This support for industrial food systems goes on even though we know that it's a dead end. So we need to be redirecting research funding into whole systems research and then substituting agroecological, biological inputs and practices for industrial food system inputs and practices, and redesigning the entire food system so that it works in an agroecological way. The key roles for researchers here are first to document the full impacts of food system reforms, these goods that we're seeing, the positive examples on food security and the achievement of food rights. And by food rights, I mean not only the right to food, but also the rights of workers in the food system, the right to information, the right to scientific knowledge, the right to participate. There are a whole number of rights that are being violated systematically in food systems. Next, we need to be testing the feasibility of specific alternatives that would let humanity live within planetary boundaries in this just and sustainable space for humanities. Third, we need to be conceptualizing virtuous circles to replace vicious food system circles and linear patterns. Next, we need to be defining and articulating sustainable diets and consumption. I know that you got a lecture on sustainable diets from the fellow from the Global Foodprint Network in the last session. The Mediterranean diet is a pretty good example of a sustainable diet. So you folks in Italy are way ahead. Then we need to be analyzing how to shift our entire culture. That's something we really have not figured out yet. How to make the societal shift and how to do it very quickly. And finally, we need to be working with business to measure true costs. Business alone can't be doing that. But researchers can be working with them to ensure that these are incorporated in decisions. And then moving on to my final point that I want to make this afternoon, we need to be implementing democratic governance of food systems. This chart comes from FAO again. There's a project called Sustainability Assessment of Food Systems, or SAFA, and they use this diagram for SAFA. I put this up here because many times when people think about sustainability, they think about people, planet, and profits, and they leave out governance. But governance is just as important as the social costs, the economic implications, and the environmental costs and implications. And without that democratic governance, we will not reach the kinds of reforms that we absolutely must reach. Some of the significance of changing governance is that it opens up government to include civil society instead of just the experts. Civil society includes people who are at the front lines of having their rights violated. It also includes NGOs and social movements who have great ideas of solutions and who will need to actually implement those solutions on the ground. Democratic governance creates spaces for public discussion of food futures with multiple partners. We will get to better solutions if we hear from more people. We won't reach those solutions if we just have little rooms full of experts who are talking to themselves. And we certainly won't be implementing those solutions. Changing governance also helps to break gridlocks on food insecurity and hunger that we've seen more and more by increasing attention to the right to food and food justice, food access, and food distribution instead of just increasing the amount of food that's available, which is one of the myths that the industrial food system has been pushing, that we need to produce more food. No, we have food surpluses in many regions. It needs to be distributed better. We also will see more support for local and decentralized food systems, greater strength and collective impact of these alternative food systems that are emerging everywhere around the world. And finally, largely through more localized food systems, we'll see greater food system resilience in a changing climate. We'll see food systems that can weather and endure the dramatic changes in weather, literally, that we'll be seeing over the next few decades. So key roles for policymakers in making this shift to democratic governance include opening up governance to include civil society, making sure that there is a space for civil society and that there are spaces to hold these forums. I really admire what the Feltrinelli Foundation has done in creating this space over the last 2 days for a discussion among people from different sectors of society. But we need those forums everywhere, and we need forums that anyone can attend. Any interested member of the public who wants to learn about food systems and contribute to changes in food systems. We will also see improved accountability of governments with more democratic governance, more accountability to actually fulfill rights so that everyone can access food for all and find employment opportunities at fair wages. We need policymakers to be supporting producers who use agroecological production methods, and not just supporting those producers, but also putting tremendous attention into restoring degraded areas, that third of world soils that have been degraded to the point that they are no longer producing as much as they could be. And finally, we need policymakers to take away the bad subsidies and provide incentives for businesses, including farms, that are using true cost accounting and using positive, sustainable practices. So, this is what we want to see. There's a kind of push-pull system of incentives that will lead to promoting agroecology and true cost food systems, and at the same time, we want to pull away those incentives that are pushing in the wrong direction. So pushing people, governments, producers, businesses toward sustainable practices and away from the things that are not going to get us to the future that we all want. And as we consider all three of these solutions, we need to be keeping in mind, staying focused on our vision of what the food system must provide and the most feasible and direct paths to reach those goals. And just to reiterate, the most important things that food systems must provide are access to healthy food for everyone, purchase, growing some of your own, rights-based approaches that focus first on poor and disadvantaged populations and include them in every step of planning, policy-making, decision-making. Second aspect of the vision is better employment opportunities and living wages. If we can provide living wages, then youth will stay on farms. They really want to continue farming, but we've made it impossible for them to do so in the food system now that has such tragically low wages for farmers because so much of the profits are being funneled away from farmers. And finally, opportunities for small-scale producers to produce food sustainably through agroecology. That will require capacity building, technical assistance, subsidies and incentives, and voice in finding solutions to current problems through democratic governance. So those things are all parts of the vision of the sustainable food system that we have to keep in our minds as we work together toward implementing it. Thank you very much for your attention.